Hi class, this is the video I was going to upload for class. This course is the spatial layering assignment. We're going to talk about two things first, composition and then of course spatial layering. So the first thing to do, the first thing to do is to establish the background field. Of course, the first marks on the sheet. You can do this on trace paper, you can do this in your sketchbook, individual sheets, that's fine too. But in other words, to actually draw the golden section boundary, of course, the first layer on the field, and you draw the square, then of course you divide the square in half on one side like that. Then of course you're going to take your compass and from the midpoint, then of course to the end point of the square, you're going to be drawing the golden section rectangle. Of course you can simply do that easily with the compass. Then of course the edge, you don't need to know this angle, or of course definitely not this one, because you know, this will give you the end of this boundary here. So of course that's the golden section rectangle. So of course 34 by whatever this dimension, I think it comes out to 55 feet it should be. So that's the first thing that you do in every sketch. You need to show this in every sketch so that way you'll have the exact proportion. If you look at this, if you take this down onto a parallel bar on your drafting table, then of course if you figure out the angle of the golden section, you can put the triangle on that, figure that one out. Then of course, instead of going back, if you wanted to figure out if other rectangles in the world or in a drawing that you look throughout the whole semester or the rest of your architecture career, then of course you can place the adjustable triangle and figure out, just move the triangle up to where that angle is, of course draw that. And then if you hold that angle and you move your parallel bar up, then of course you can see other rectangles. Then of course the angle, you can simply see and measure if that one is a golden section. Of course, if this one is not, I just ran it because of course it doesn't actually go up to the edge. So you know, if you want to see if this larger one is, then of course you take that angle and measure. Of course, I'm just freeing it, it isn't. But of course, if you want to gradually make the golden section rectangle large, you can draw the diagonal. Then of course you can go back up and project those where that point falls. Then of course you can gradually make the golden section rectangle larger, of course, or as small as you want to be, just by figuring out that angle. So we talk about some of the compositions. One way to approach this is you can figure out what compositional strategy you're using. You can do the strategy of the centers. Of course, the edges are here at the center. Of course, you can do an asymmetrical, which of course is definitely more modern. This will give you more space in the field to design the corners around. The closer you put the, you know, of course, you really have two set pieces. The screen wall, of course, or the loggia will be placed at the X and Y coordinate throughout that field. You can do an asymmetrical one, maybe the screen wall's here at the bottom, you can place it at the top. You know, one strategy is, you know, figure out where this can actually be placed. There should be a certain definite point where this angle, where this screen wall can be placed on that field. Okay, so and then of course, you know, in each sketch you need to carefully sketch freehand, of course, where all these either these round columns or the square piers are going to go on that field. Then of course your final drawing, you have to carefully space each bay out carefully with, you know, precision. Of course, your sketches are just going to be freehanding these to see where these fall. And of course, you can quickly just measure on your scale, you know, the dimensions of how far apart these are supposed to be spaced. So if it's 55, so you have to count how many bays or how many columns there are. Then of course, you can equally space those among this field. So let's talk about spatial layering. Because really, you know, the project, it's both going to be an additive and a subtractive field. Again, it's additive because you're actually adding graphite or pencil onto the drawing paper. Then of course, but in your mind spatially, you need to think about this as a large stone tablet or a large wooden block. Of course, with the jigsaw, so you just go back and cut in or poche out these spaces. You should probably see a lot of, you know, residual space. Of course, is the space that's left over after you design the courtyards. Of course, you kind of have to imagine that this is a solid block, and of course, you just go back and cut the spaces out. It should, of course, ultimately you're going to be having to draw a small axonometric showing you the layout of these courtyards. So when talking about spatial layering, again, here are, of course, the spaces you have to design for the loggia I'm calling, and of course the transition zone, of course, which has the fins in it. If you want to see a real world application where the fins are, there's multiple places like this in architecture. The first thing I could think of is, of course, this other Frank Lloyd Wright house called the Johnson House. Of course, I think the other term for it is called wing spread. It's for Herbert Johnson, the creator of the Johnson Wax company, which makes polishes and all different types of cleaning products, I'm sure. But his house that Frank Lloyd Wright did has this really wonderful large great hall, of course, where the spaces are kind of defined by these large fins. There's a wonderful interior courtyard. You look at that, of course, these are all doors to access to transition from the outdoor patio spaces, then of course to this main grill hall. There's a large fireplace as an object in the center of that field. It's a really wonderful project that he did. That's just one kind of isolated example. But again, so to actually do the spaces, you could talk about spatial layering. You know, there's really no layer between this space and this space. I think I've shown you some in the examples in the PDF file. But again, of course, what you're going to be, this doesn't mean that this is not a piece of architecture. There's a lot of classical temples that have, you know, direct connection between one space and another. But for this assignment, you're going to be investigating spatial layers. So in other words, that means that you're going to be showing how to transition from one space to another. So in other words, you can probably use the horizontal layer as a layer of space between one courtyard to another. The same condition with, of course, this loggia, which has the columns, and you're going to be navigating from one corridor, of course, to another one. Then, of course, it's up to you. Like if I were to use the corridor, then of course you can place the courtyard spaces adjacent to that, so on and so forth. Or of course, you can design them to where they have their own sort of spatial. They have their own zone between. Oh, sorry, let me just throw something here. Of course, you can design the courtyards to where there's that special space before, of course, like on the field, you're going to be showing these as carved out. So you can actually do another space between the court and the actual room itself. Then, of course, you can go back and cut out or draw in some apertures to let light into the courtyards. So I should see a few investigations of light coming in from at least the boundary into some of these spaces. You know, what you're not going to be doing is showing, you know, holes, you know, everywhere. If this is the background field, then of course you can show maybe one light source coming into the courtyard from here. You're not going to be showing all these openings and holes everywhere throughout the field, just maybe one large window. Of course, what you can do, if you look at castle plans, then of course they have, if you look at Ronchamp Chapel by Corbusier, Ronchamp Chapel. It's a wonderful example of a thick wall conditioning. If you look at the plan of that in the section, basically you have these wonderful splayed wall details to where you can actually get some really dramatic lighting effects coming into the space in the chapel. So you can consider, you know, adjusting the corners where you can get more light coming into this corridor. Of course, you can imagine this can be an interior space. Of course, it can be outdoor corridor field. It's another one. You don't have to you don't have to decide one or the other. But of course, I just want to see some sort of investigation of light coming in from one of the sides in the corridor.